Now called to order. I'm going to just call the names of the board members that are here. Please say your names.
Luis Palacio, present.
Eugene White.
Cirillo, present.
Pat Payne, present.
And Colin Murtado, present. At this time, the chair recognizes a quorum and the Finance Committee. Dr. White?
Yes, the first action is to adjourn the Finance Committee to open our special meeting. And so the Finance Committee will be adjourned until we complete our special meeting.
It'll recess, not adjourn.
Okay.
We will
That's
recess
adjourn. Okay, recess.
and we will convene a public hearing.
Yes.
Ms. Campbell, would you please be present for the 2026 library budget?
Good morning. I'd like to invite Mr. Mike Roeder. He is our advisor for our long-term plan. He is going to review our long-term plan prior to me doing the budget.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Mike. How are you this morning?
Good, thank you. Good to see some familiar faces from last year. This is, obviously, without saying, been the most interesting year I have experienced in my career in terms of legislation that was passed and trying to sort through the details of that legislation. And each unit I work with is somewhat unique. The legislation doesn't affect everyone the same way. And so I'm going to take a little bit of time just to kind of hit the highlights of the legislation that was passed that's going to impact your budget directly. And before I start, I also want to say that we were hopeful to have the 2026 assessed valuation certified for your material today, but unfortunately it has not been yet. The legislation has delayed many counties from being able to hit the August 1st deadline. That's normally the deadline for certified assessed valuations. But unfortunately we don't have that data for you today. So we'll be working with an assumption. And when we get the actual number, we'll report that back to the board. I'd start off by saying that was probably the most active legislative session I had seen in quite some time. Early in the session, I met with the director of the county association, and his name's David Bonarf, and he and I were having a conversation of just how things were starting. And I said to David, I said, this feels like a train to me. Nothing seems to be slowing it down. And his comment back to me was interesting in that he said he's been doing this a long time as well. And he said, this feels like the last weekend of the session, and it is the end of January. And so, and there was internal fighting. It wasn't like politics as usual. There were a lot of internal battles going on, trying to figure out what they were going to do. And just to kind of hit those highlights, the governor came out early on in Senate Bill 1. The first version that came out had some pretty steep property tax cuts in it. And there was no replacement revenue that came along with that. And so that concerned a lot of people, including the Senate. And there were negotiations going on between the governor's office and the Senate. And ultimately, then the Senate came out with a revised version that really wasn't going to cut property tax and go backwards, but it was going to limit all the future revenue going forward, in that we were not going to get any new revenue in property tax in year 1, and then 1% in year 2, and 3% in year 3. So they were trying to control property tax by limiting future revenue. So different model than what the governor had proposed. And again, in the Senate version, their version, there was no replacement revenue in that model. And the governor was not happy with that model either. And so then it eventually bounced over to the House And Representative Thompson, who's chair of House Ways and Means, had his own version that he'd been working on for a while of what property tax reform should look like. And I will tell you, it is a pretty complicated piece of legislation that was in that language. And so ultimately, that ended up being the bill that got passed, was really the House version with one asterisk. The governor was still not super happy about even that model on its own. There was the addition of what's called now a new property tax credit. Unlike a circuit breaker, where you circuit breaker out on the value of the home, this is a credit of up to 10% or up to $300. And that was new. And then that was then included in Representative Thompson's bill, and ultimately, I believe, what brought them together to pass the bill. And it all happened pretty quickly. Once that happened, it passed. It didn't go to committee. Like I said, it felt like a train early on, and that's kind of how it went through. They immediately passed it. The governor signed it, and then they began to do some revisions to it right away through a DLGF bill, a Department of Local Government Finance bill, started to fix some things that were not going to work. And so, if that kind of sums up the session, it was by far the most stressful session for me, because I had a lot of clients asking how this is going to impact me, how that's going to impact me. But it was all moving so fast, going back and forth, it was almost, and it was even hard to project even after it was passed, all the nuances of the language. I'd also say that, we had a pretty complicated system to begin with, and we've really kind of doubled down on it. It's really gotten pretty complicated in how you have to analyze this data. As I said, you almost have to make it unique to each client. So some of the bigger highlights of the bill revolved around trying to provide homeowner relief on property taxes. Obviously, 2023 and 2024 property tax bills increased considerably because property values were increasing. And so they were looking for ways to limit that or reduce that impact. And so there's always been what's called the homestead supplemental deduction. And that in this year is 37.5% that homeowners receive. That is an area where they've really focused on, in the sense that they are going to increase that from 37.5% from today's number to 40% next year, but then it will increase by 2031 to 66 2/3%. So to give you some idea, that's taking away a large piece of the tax base, and means there will be less ability to tax. And so just to use quick math on it, if you had a $300,000 home, $100,000 is what you'll be paying on. You just basically only be paying on a third of the value of the house at that point. And then in addition to that, then they put in place this new credit then. So you calculate the tax bill so that if it's this $300,000 home, their maximum tax cap is $3,000 with the circuit breaker, unless there's a referendum that goes beyond that. But then that $300,000 house would then get a $300 credit. So in some cases, we ended up now below the 1% circuit breaker in terms of what the liability is on homes. So that was a big piece that was involved. And they also implemented a new deduction for the properties that were in the 2% categories. And the 2% really means rental property and farm ground. Those are the two categories that were impacted. And that starts at 6% next year and will grow to 33% by 2031. Again, another loss of assessed valuation on the tax base. Farm ground was reduced. Now, not a lot of farm ground left in Marion County that would sway things one way or the other, but farm ground was impacted dramatically in the sense that they reduced what's called the capitalization rate, which dropped the assessed valuation on a per acre charge by 7%. But then they, in addition, got a 6% deduction for this new deduction. And so You listen to a lot of the rural communities, they're going to be hurting because a lot of their tax base, which is farm ground, is being lost to this new deduction. And of course, in Marion County, there would be a lot of apartment rentals or property rentals. And so that will impact certainly the library. And so whether that actually trickles down, I don't know. You know, some of these large corporations that own multiple rental properties, you know, will they reduce rent as a result of this new deduction? Maybe questionable. Maybe on a smaller scale they might. But nevertheless, they're going to have a new deduction that they've not had before. So time will tell with that. My first boss said this to me years ago: the only fair tax is the one someone else pays. And that's kind of what we're doing. We're moving pieces around to see who the payer is going to be. And I will say there's going to be more of a shift to commercial property in the last 2 years because home values were increasing so rapidly. It was shifting the burden from commercial to residential. Now this model will start to shift some of that tax burden back to commercial, with one exception. They also took a big swipe at business personal property in that in the year 2027, any business that has $2 million of personal property or less will no longer be paying property tax on that personal property, which the threshold before was $80,000. So that will take in a lot of small businesses that won't have to pay business personal property tax. A lot of larger corporations that have large personal property inventories, they'll still be paying. That was originally supposed to be $1 million in 26, but they took that out because that was one of those cleanup bills that they came back through in the DLGF. They simply didn't have enough time to redo that. So again, that's another swipe at the tax base. And so we're going to see in the modeling is that we're actually going to lose assessed valuation, and tax rates are going to go up. That may sound strange, but they are expecting that. They're actually expecting tax rates to go up between now and 2031. But it'll all depend on the payer and what that assessment and what their own individual assessment does. Another big piece that this is something that we'll definitely want to watch is that they made a fairly significant restructuring of local option income tax. Now, you don't get a lot of local option income tax to fund your budget, but you do get about $3.8 million that's used to reduce your property tax liability. It's collected through local option income tax, and then they replace a portion of your property tax with that. That goes away. That doesn't happen, and so your property tax levy will not have that deduction starting in 2028. By the way, all this lit change that I'm describing takes effect January of 28. And so the county, the city council and county council, they'll have to adopt a new rate between July 1 of 2027 and October 1st of 27 for what's going to happen in 28. I'm going to show you, I'm setting you this all up so that when you see your numbers that it's going to make sense, like, oh yeah, well, we got to focus on that and we got to focus on this. So that's a pretty significant change in your modeling. Although there is some good news in that, as I mentioned, some of those bills that were passed earlier or were considered early on had no property tax replacement credit or no replacement revenue in it. They have said that the counties can adopt up to 0.05 lit rate for libraries. And so that's actually a significant amount of money. I'll talk to you about that. Now, I'm not sure you're going to get them to adopt that much of a rate, and you're relying on a small portion of the current COVID revenue right now. But another place that we're probably going to want to have a lot of conversation between now and 2027 about where the library fits into this new whole lit model, and will they adopt a lit rate high enough to help you make up for what you're going to lose in this new property tax credit that I mentioned. That property tax credit, by the way, starts in 2026. That is going to be a pure loss of revenue in 2026, and I'll show you that in a moment as well. So pretty significant restructuring with local option income tax. I won't go into all the details, but just know that's how they intend to address libraries. Now, in your case, you're a countywide system, and that rate would all be up to you. In other counties now, they've changed the modeling of how it's distributed too, in that if it's not a countywide library system, the money that's collected from whatever the rate is that the county adopts will be distributed based on population within their libraries. And I will tell you, that creates winners and losers, because the current model works for some and not for others. But when you purely go by population, you might hear libraries start to scream saying, we can't have that formula. So if you go to a library association meeting, you might hear concern about local option income tax and how it's going to impact them. In your case, again, unique to you, is you have this, what's called levy freeze, this $3.8 million is being used to reduce your tax liability, and then you have this code piece that you get. Those will be the two pieces in this new lit model that we'll have to work through as we go forward. So that is, in a nutshell, what was a really active session. And so what's this look like for you? I'm going to start with, and you might recall me talking about this in the past. I'm going to start with this page because it provides some history. And I apologize, there's a lot of little numbers on here, but it's because it's averaging 6 years, so it goes way far back. I'll try to make it a little larger here. There we go, maybe that's a little bit better. So for a number of years, this actually goes back to the last property tax reform that we went through in like 2008 and before that. We have been basing how much property tax we've been able to collect on what's called the 6-year non-farm personal income factor. The state did not want property taxes going up faster than what the income of the state was going up. And so that is the model we operated under for many years now. And so that was the philosophy back then. And to be real frank, for the most part, has worked pretty well. But in recent years, when the income started rising much more rapidly, it started generating. So if you go back to 2021 here, you can see that income in that year jumped 10.1% as a state. And that was the COVID year, right? So there was a lot of new money put into the economy, and so incomes rose that year. But even the year before in 2020, 7.2 and 10.1. Well, what that started to do is drive that average up pretty rapidly. And they didn't like that because they were trying to limit property tax. So they put a conditional statement in that basically said, we're gonna use that calculation, but then we're gonna apply 80% to it. And then if that 80% is greater than 4%, we're still going to limit you to 4%. And so for many, many years, we operated with the 6-year non-farm personal income factor. We get into these high property value years, and they just almost move away from that formula altogether and just say, it's going to be 4%. And that's I'll show you in your calculation, the maximum levy for that now. So this is a reconstruction of your maximum levy. Maximum levy meaning the amount of property tax that you can collect in your general fund. How you operate. That is by far your largest source of revenue to operate the library system. And so this factor is really important. So if you were to use that previous chart I had, you would have followed these percentages directly back to those 6-year averages. But then we got into 24 and 25 and now 26. Okay, so this is the new number. They said 4%. So they just kind of overrode that formula. Now, that formula goes back in place and started in 2027. But don't count on it. because I would anticipate in this next legislative session, they are not going to allow property taxes to increase over 5.5% again. But that's the way it's currently written, is that we would go back to that. So again, they just kind of overrode it here. Now, in an important piece on here that I've highlighted here, remember me mentioned that $3.8 billion. What would happen is your maximum levy was computed with this reduction in it. And then at the end of the day, what would happen is we would subtract $3,854,000. And it's been that number for many years now. The county collects enough in local option income tax to make that number stable. And they've always used that then to reduce your liability. But you can see this year, from this year, 59 million going to 65 million, that's a big percentage increase. So that's going to impact your tax rate. And it's going to look kind of rough on paper. So I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. So those are a couple things that is unique to you. The assessed valuation. Now, there are a lot of schools that have engaged policy analytics to do a parcel by parcel analysis of the tax base. And so they can, for one, estimate what their referendum revenue is going to be. And two, if they're issuing debt, how much tax base they're going to have to issue debt. I don't know that that's necessary for the library system yet at this point for 2026, because there's just not substantial change happening in 26. It's going to really mess things up for you. Now, I may be coming back to you next spring saying, hey, we might want to engage them, go ahead and do this parcel by parcel analysis, because now we're starting to see more things play out. And I would also say that this next session is still going to be pretty active. Now, Representative Thompson has been out publicly saying this to associations. Don't expect massive changes to the framework of what we've just passed, but you can expect adjustments. So I think the framework is what we're going to have to work with, but what those adjustments might be, it may be good, it may be bad. We just don't know, obviously, how that's going to play out. I would anticipate that we're going to have a lot more conversations about local option income tax, and maybe it looks different for libraries at the end of the day, but nevertheless. But on the assessed valuation, this was the piece we were really hopeful to have for you this morning. Lily and I both checked this morning the website. It's still not posted, but we really were hopeful that we would have the 2026 number for you, but we don't. And so what I have done is I've seen a model of a school district in Marion County and used kind of similar assumptions based on the blend of that, the makeup of the property in that district, and kind of assumed it'd be kind of similar to what might happen countywide. But this is not a parcel by parcel analysis. This is just a model to show you, like, if the assessed valuation drops 1%, this is what it'll look like going forward. But what you can see in 27, it's a little higher than normal. Right now we're going from a 37.5% supplemental deduction to 40%. That's just not that big of a leap in 1 year. That's not a big hit. The next year we go from 40% to 46%. That's a bigger bump of assessed valuation we're going to lose. And so, and I mentioned business personal property. That's going to be the first year that we're going to have that $2 million threshold that anyone below won't have to pay. So we could lose a lot more assessed valuation in 27, but then we go to the modeling of really the supplemental homestead deduction growing, and we also have the growing deduction for rental property. And so again, right now, I don't think that we need to go to that study, but we might when we get a little farther down the road. Okay, local option income tax. And by the way, we will get you a fiscal plan when we get this new certified assessed valuation. As soon as it comes out, we'll get you a fiscal plan with that final number in it. Today, by the way, is just a public hearing. There's no action on the budget required of you. So it's just to hear information about kind of where everything's kind of going with this. And Lolita obviously is going to present in greater detail your actual budget and what it includes. I'm showing you a model, just kind of projecting out what this might look like going forward. Okay. Now, local option income tax, where I have not spent a whole lot of time talking to you about this in the past, because you have such little that you generate from the county on this. But I want to give you some idea of what 0.05 would be going forward if the county were to adopt. Now, this information actually is known countywide, that the rate in Marion County is 0.0202. Now, over time, the county changes the mix of how that rate, what's made up of that rate, but for quite some time has been limited to the 0.0202. And that revenue in 2028, I'm forecasting, based on the current last known year, 23, about $757 million. Okay, so that's a 2%, a little better than a 2% rate. You would be able to collect 0.05. And so if the council or county were to adopt the maximum rate as it currently stands, that's $18.7 million for the library. So the good news is there is a lot of capacity there for you to be able to make up maybe some of these potential losses. There are some libraries that are not going to be able to do that because they're going to get a distribution based on population. The 0.05 might be enough in total, but the mix of it and how it goes out to the library is going to be different. So again, everybody's affected just a little bit different. But I just wanted to give you some idea of what 0.05 is. And so, I can't tell you what this rate's going to look like in 2028 because will the county try to make up some of their loss to the credit in that year? And so this is the difference in the House version. They're kind of pushing people towards local option income tax, away from property tax into income tax. And so that's the reason they put pretty significant changes in this. So now I will tell you, there are no lit dollars for schools. Schools really took a pretty good hit in this session. They had the credit losses and they're going to lose referendum dollars because the AV is going down, that loses ability to issue debt. But there's no ability for them to adopt a local option income tax to replace any of that revenue. So you might hear schools screaming, or you might hear schools running referendums early because they're going to be trying to make up for the dollars that they potentially will lose. But again, big changes around local option income tax. Now, I'm going to show you real quickly, page 15. So in 2028, this is the current makeup, and this is going to change. We've been notified that it's potential changes coming yet this year, but this is the current makeup of the 2%. You only get to participate in what's called the COIT portion. And of the COIT portion, so in 28, if it generates $711 million, the COIT portion is about half of that.
Excuse me, Mike, what do you mean by the COIT portion?
So this 2.02% total rate for the county then is made up of COIT, a little bit of athlete revenue, the levy, the LOIT freeze. Remember me mentioned the LOIT freeze where they're using some of that for replacement of property tax. That goes away in 28. But the whole makeup, it's so hard to speculate the county might do with the rate in 2028. I've heard no conversations about what that will look like. And so you have all each one of these titles represents a piece of these the 2.02 rate. And in your case, though, you only get a small sliver of the top line. You don't get directly, this low freeze you get, but it's replacing property tax, so it's not, it's not new revenue to you. But you get 0.2% of this COIT portion. So the reason I'm pointing this out, in 2028, right now, I'm estimating that you would get about $700,000 if they continue just to give you the same percentage. But if they were to adopt the 0.05, remember we mentioned the $18 million? So that's just to give you some idea of what you're currently getting versus what could be available to the library. And so as we start to look at some of the forecasting, that will be part of the conversation, because there is the ability to make it up. Unlike property tax, you don't have any control over property tax other than the debt fund. You control the debt fund, but on the general fund, that's frozen. You can't go beyond that 4%, whatever that 6-year factor is. But on lit, the county controls that, and there is capacity there. So to give you some idea of where we might be focusing our energy in the future. So with all that said, that's hitting all the highlights. Now we're kind of going to look at the summary of it in your modeling of there we go. A lot of numbers, I apologize. So I'm gonna start right here. This line right here is the most important line on the page. And the reason is it says excess deficit revenues over expenditures. And this tells you whether your budget has been in balance or out of balance. And what you can see here is for the last several years, we have been in balance. And based on your current spending through June 30th, I'm anticipating that we will still see some gain in cash balance yet this year. It's after that where it gets a little cloudy. And what I mean by that is there's two things happening in 26 that are going to make things a little different. You see this new line up here? Loss from property tax credits. So that's the $1.5 million that I'm estimating there. Some of the loss will be taken in the debt fund. Some of it will be taken in your general fund. Now that's another thing to watch, because I don't think that was intentional. Circuit breaker loss right now, today, is all taken in the general fund, and the debt fund takes no loss in the circuit breaker. Right now, the way the law is currently written, the loss from the credit is some taken in your general fund and some taken in your debt fund. You would rather have it that way, because your operating funds, that's the golden egg you want to protect. The debt fund you can actually raise if you wanted to make it up. You could raise that levy to make it up over time. I would anticipate that will be a conversation that they will probably try to push that back into just the general fund. We'll see on that. So that number right now is just a portion of what you would lose. But also in 26, the reason this looks pretty rough in 26, like the budget's we also have 27 pays next year. Just the timing of it. About every 7 years, we run into a year where we have 27 pays. And so where a typical year would have 26 pays, next year, because of your payroll timing, there will be 27 pays. So you're going to have more expense in a year. And so I've tried to model that in, but then show you that it goes back down, then it would go back down again some in that next year, because you wouldn't have 27 pays every year thereafter. You'd have a period now that you wouldn't have, you'd have another 7 years or so before you'd run into that again. But when you go back and look at your history, you're in a strong cash position, and that's what you'll hear me say. You're in a position that's going to buy you time to see some of these things play out. You are not going to have to take a knee-jerk reaction to what's going on. You are going to have to react, but not a knee-jerk reaction, because you're in a strong cash position to get through this. So when you look at the end of 24, we ended with $45 million in cash. Probably be similar to that again this year. Then you see it drop pretty good in 26 partly because of this new circuit breaker credit and partly because we got 27 pays. Would still leave us with $34 million. I've always said to my clients, people ask, what's a good cash balance? I always look at the next year's property tax amount. And so you have $59 million and you have $10 million in circuit breaker loss. So you're collecting about $50 million net real property tax. If you had $25 million in cash, if you had 50% of that, what that does is it gets you from January to May, June when you get your property tax settlements in. And so that's a good cash flow. There's a lot of people that are well below that and aren't even close to that. And they have to borrow what's called tax anticipation warrants and borrow against their operating and pay it back by the end of the year. So the point being though, that you're in a strong cash position. And yes, we have a higher expense year that we're going to see in 26, and we have that new deduction. Then also you see here, you see that $3.8 million zero out. It really isn't affecting this number. It's only affecting this property tax number. You can see the property tax number shoots up. Okay, so in that year. And so revenue-wise, it's not affecting this bottom line, but it is going to impact your tax rate. Moving on. This is the debt fund. Now, this is going to be a new conversation we're going to have. I think a lot of places are going to be having. This is, I think, will be part of this legislative conversation, what just happened. In the past, for many years now, since at least going back in this history, we've always focused on a tax rate in this fund. We have said 0.0318 is the maximum rate that we will collect for debt, and we have managed that. I think that goes back to even maybe when you did Central Library with the big bond issue, that you had made a rate commitment at that time. It was pre-me being involved with your planning process. But nevertheless, we have always managed to this 0.0318. And I would say that that's what we will be requesting for 2026 is 0.0318. Again, yeah, the assessed valuation is going down a little bit, but we're not into those steep years where it's going down. And so we would only issue enough debt to manage to that tax rate in 2026. So there's no plan at this point to go over or make any rate changes there. Even though the assessed valuation is going down, but you can see with the assessed valuation going down, there's less revenue there, right? And you can see this property tax credit in here. It's a new loss in this fund. That's the one I'm not sure is going to be there next year. I think that might get moved to the general fund and this may be zero, we'll see. But here's where the conversation I think we need to change with the community and with the city county council is that even though our rate may be going up, we might want to consider saying, just give us the same levy. Just give us the same levy every year on the debt fund. We can no longer make this rate conversation because the assessed valuation is dropping and they're expecting rates to go up. But you'd be saying to the community, we're not asking you for more. We didn't decide who's going to pay it, right? They've got all these pieces moving around. We didn't decide who's going to pay it. But as a community, we're just asking for the same amount as we got last year. And so the conversation now changes, in my opinion. We'll see, time will tell. In my opinion, I think it will become a levy conversation. We're going to ask you for 4% more in the general fund, and we're going to ask you for the same amount in the debt fund. Or maybe it's a slight increase in the debt fund, but it will become more about the levy conversation and not about who's paying it, because it'll vary who's paying it, depending on how this all plays out between now and 2031. So that I think you'll start here in 27, as people approach their budget process in 2026, 427, I think you're going to hear a lot of units then talking about levy, not tax rate so much. The next page is what's your library improvement reserve fund, you have a nice cash balance here. You're really not spending this money. This money is really reserved for capital and nature type expenditures. We actually gained a little cash at the end of 2024, and the reason we're gaining cash, we're not putting more money in it from the general fund, but we are gaining some interest in this fund. It's being credited to this fund. So the interest income is being deposited here. We have budgeted a little money, but we've not been spending it. But you can see what I'm doing with that interest over time. Obviously, they're trying to drive interest rates down, and probably will happen over time. So I've tried to factor that into the modeling. I don't know how quick it's going to go down or go up, but I tried to account for some of what's being portrayed as future rate decreases. So, but nevertheless, this is money beyond your general fund that is available to you. So again, another cash reserve. And then we have the rainy day fund. We, again, have not been moving any money recently into this fund. We have in the past. That's where this money came from. This money was built up from general fund dollars in previous years being transferred in here. And so at the end of 24, we had a gain of $325,000. We had some interest that we deposited into this fund. So at the end of 24, you have about $8.2 million. We do appropriate some dollars in here. We used to use this fund kind of as a cash flow. We'd need money before we got the money from the bonds for the projects, and sometimes we'd pay for expenses out of here, and then we get the bond, we'd reimburse ourselves. But again, you can see what I'm doing with interest is like, yeah, this year we'll still have some pretty good interest, but over time, I think we'd start to see that decline. But again, this is cash beyond your general fund. This is more flexible than LRF. LRF is restricted really to capital and nature type project or expenses. This could be for beyond that. It could be used on some of your operating expenses. So again, the theme being you're in a strong cash position. Now, here's where it really kind of looks ugly going forward is tax rates. And again, I think they're expecting this, but if our assessed valuation goes down 1%, hypothetically, if it goes down 1%, our general fund levy goes up 4%, our debt rate stays flat. That's still a rate increase in this year of 3.78% but then you can see what the rate increases are going forward is that the percentages look pretty crazy. Now, Policy Analytics has done a number of studies across the state, and I think that's what's being discovered in a lot of these models. They might be a little surprised by how quickly tax rates might start going up in 2027. Will that cause a reaction? I don't know. But that's what some of the modeling is starting to show are higher tax rates. So
That model shows your bond rate going up. Is that to keep to the revenue?
To the levy. Yeah, so basically what I did, that's a good point, Russell, is this model is showing that rate where we're 0.0318 this year. Remember on that revenue or summary page, I just said, let's just keep the same levy. We're going to ask you for the same exact levy. Well, the same exact levy with a lower assessed valuation causes that debt rate to go up. Now, maybe you won't do that. This is just to model out what would be like that if you were again saying, hey, community, we're just asking for the same amount of money. We're not asking you for more. Tax rates may look strange to you, but we're not asking you for more. That's a result of all the Senate Bill 1 changes. So that's a lot. I wish it were simpler than that. And I can tell you it took a lot of people a long time, even after it was passed, to work through the details of this. And so just know for 26, what Lolita is going to present to you later can be funded. We've got additional expense built in there. We've got the credits, and you're still going to be in a strong enough cash position that you wouldn't have to do anything in terms of cutting expense. Now, I will tell you, just looking at the expenses through June 30th this year, the library's done a good job of holding some of those expenses. Anything we hold today will obviously help for future. So the expenses for the first half of the year look really good.
Mike, thank you so very much.
My pleasure.
You started us off with the metaphor of a train
Yeah.
running down the legislators. And
Yeah.
then you gave us an option to really understand with some really important understandings of the losses of assessed valuation. You helped us understand more about the local option income tax and what's going to affect us there, helping us to understand about the possibilities of levy. Thank you so very much. Let's make sure that we ask any questions that are from our public. Anyone want to present any comments? If there's no one that wants to present a comment and there are no questions whatsoever, any of the board members, any questions? Please.
Thanks. You've summarized a moving target, one to digest, and two to put it together in a way that we can present it this way. So just
My pleasure. It's been an interesting year is all I can say.
Well, thank you again. Can we have a motion to close the public hearing? Oh, yeah, no. Thank you. Please.
So on the valuation of the library, do you have an expectation when that may happen?
I actually thought they were going to hit the first deadline. I'd heard through someone else that they were on track, and so something must have happened. And I don't know what that is, but I would expect it any day. Marion County's always been really good about getting it done on time. Again, Marion County is not alone here. The majority of counties are not certified yet, so.
Was that the 0.202, right?
No, that's, two different topics here. The assessed valuation will affect your budget for 26 in the sense of tax rate. The 2.02, we had received notification that they're looking to change the mix of that this year. But that's not impacting you dramatically because they're still trying to keep the amount for the levy freeze, that 3.8 million, in there, because that doesn't have to go away until 28. But they might try to bump a little more into the code where that's the flexible money. So we might get a little more there, but we'll have to see what they ultimately pass. So that is something on the table. But it's working under the old model. And in 28, I don't know what they'll be looking at.
So which one is the rate that that we're waiting for? Is it the mix or is it something else?
So we're waiting on the assessed valuation which ultimately is the county assessor to the county auditor to certify to us. And then that's when they'll work our budget off of that. And then the city county council has to decide the makeup of that 2.02 rate. But I don't think there's going to be anything in there that's going to adversely impact you. If anything, it might be a slight improvement because they're trying to take some excess dollars they received in lead and move them to more flexible dollars in code. So I'm sure they're trying to help their budget with that as well. So that might be a little bit better, but it's not going to be anything dramatic for you. But
It'll play with the
change the
composition
mix.
of general
Yeah,
versus-
it'll change the mix a little bit.
So when you're looking at those numbers, it's like a few pages back.
On the lit?
The losses, I think
Oh.
it was like a general
Yeah.
measure.
Sure.
Those are compounding losses, right? Because
Yeah, that's what
every year,
so this is just a model and I would say because it's a model to try and pick out, some of those trends. And this is what would be called a structural deficit, meaning that it's not growing back. It's not closing it, right? It'd be one thing if you had a negative balance or a negative forecast and then it was closing to a positive. In this case, it's modeling is growing.
Right.
And so there's a structural problem there. But whether we can address that with either the change in the lit in 2028 to make up for some losses that we're experiencing from Senate Bill 1? Or will we have to start to cut some expenses? But I'm not suggesting because of your cash position that you have to go to that measure at this point. But each year, as we update this model, the whole idea behind it is like when we actually start to see a negative, we actually spent more than we took in, then that's when we got to start like, all right, how you either going to increase revenue or you got to decrease expense or a combination.
I don't know how to say this, but the $18 million sort of potential, let's put it that way.
Yeah,
That would be year to year, right? Like
That would
every
be-
year, so that's where you're saying, okay, even if we're seeing 10 million, 12, whatnot,
yeah,
we still have that potential.
yes. And that would be growing too as incomes grow because it's a rate 0.05. So, but that again, that becomes a little more political, right? Because when you start talking about rate increases of lit, that becomes a more difficult conversation. So we over the years had tried to request a larger portion of the COVID pie, but obviously they're struggling with their budgets too, trying to balance them. So that's a zero-sum game unless you raise the rate, and I don't think people want to raise that rate right now.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Any other comments or questions? May we have a motion to close the public
You need to
hearing?
have, we'll need to do her public presentation before you close the public hearing, so
Thank
that's part of it, will lead us to the balance.
Thanks, Mike.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Mike. Very much appreciated.
My pleasure.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good. I'm here today to do a budget presentation for our 2026 budget. Okay, and Mike went over, all these numbers and what our future will entail and all that good stuff. And I hope that everyone feels more comfortable knowing that even though we may have a deficit in the property tax revenue that we are going to receive, that our cash balance can cover and hold us for another couple of years or more, but until we figure out what's going to happen in 2028. So, here, of course, we have our mission and vision. And here are some key budget dates. So in our past couple of financial committee meetings, I tried to keep everyone abreast of what's going on with the budget so they'll know what's going on. Right now, today's the 12th, we're having a public hearing, and on the 25th, that's when the board will adopt the budget. And hopefully by then, we may have our assessed valuation. And if numbers change or anything like that, we will cover it with that cash balance, if there's a greater deficit in the revenue that we're predicting that we're gonna have, okay? I thought I'd put this in here because, our funding has to follow our strategic plan. I wanna congratulate my colleague, Mackenzie. She did such a great job putting this together, and I stole her slide right here. So I just wanted some of the information. I just want you to know that this is part of yours. But because our funding has to follow our strategic plan, I just want to remind everyone, this is our strategic plan, and that if you haven't received this, we'll have some available for you so you can review the detail of our strategic plan. So let's see, we have more if you want some, but most people have already received it. I don't want to go into the detail of that because I know Mike took up 45 minutes, and I'm going to try to get through this. Also, we have our community impact for 2024. And I kind of stole this information for our annual report that Mary Moore kind of put together. So this information is in here if you like to review that, and if you need one on your own, but most people may have that already. But as you can see, that we really made an impact to our community in 2024. So we invest in our impact. And how do we invest in our impact? Is by this information right here. Here are our library funds. So we have our operating fund, and we have a debt service fund, and we have the LERF and rainy day fund. Mike kind of went over the LERF, the Library Improvement Reserve Fund, but I just want to remind everyone these are some more funding that we have for the library. Then the other funds are like the contractor funds, parking, garage, share system. We also have the bond fund that we received to cover the capital projects, and then the custodian funds will be the plaque cards, staff association, and our wonderful foundation. I was gonna tell Roberta, thank you for making sure we continue to run our programs, and also our payroll liabilities. Excuse me. And then we also have a gift and grant funds, which are donations and grants, primarily for the programming. And this is our proposed budget for the 2026. For the 2026 is for operating, it's a little over 67 million. For the 2025, we're at a little over 62 million, which is an increase of about 8.25%. And our debt service, you'll see that there's a decrease because our 2017 bond, we paid that off. And so that's why there's gonna be a decrease, even though we're gonna get a 2025 bond later on this year. So you'll see a decrease of 7.22% in debt service. And then the rainy day and LERF stayed the same because we really didn't utilize it much this year. And we also are earning interest while that sits in there. So the total 2026 budget is $89,394,474, and totally it's a 4.64% increase, almost 5%. And this was advertised on August the 1st and the 8th in IBJ and the Indy Star. Mike kind of went over the tax rate history, and again, this may not even make a difference when it comes to 2028, but as you can see, where it started back in 2019, I think, when the central branch was being built or something like that, that's when the conversation was held, that we'll continue to keep that rate, and that's what we did most of the years. As you know, the years go past to 2028, that is not gonna make a difference. We're gonna try to advocate for just the same amount that we typically get instead of the tax rate. So I know in the past, we've been advocating for more lit. Right now, we're not gonna advocate for more lit, we're just advocating for the replacement of the funds that we're gonna lose in the future. So some of our budget focus is, equitable access. That is from our strategic plan. We can continue to invest in health and wellness through innovative programs, strengthen our organizational framework, continue to increase collaboration with shared system partnerships, adapt library services, leverage technology, improve services for veterans, retain and recruit talented and diverse, exceptional skilled workforce, and provide a welcoming, inclusive, accessible, and safe environment at all of our branch locations. And of course, the community support and partnership. And I thought I'd put this in here, and some may have seen this in the past, and I found this, I was like, this is a good representative of what we received from our property tax distribution. So as you can see, we're just a small little part of the pie. Everyone receives a greater portion of it besides the library. And you see we're sitting right there of that dollar, down a little bit more dollar, and that's 2/10 of that dollar that we receive from the property tax distribution. Here are some of our revenue challenges, and Mike Roder really went through this about the SB1 fiscal impact. Sorry. So for the SB1 bill, it was predicted, that's the property tax relief and the business property tax exemption and local income tax changes. Those are the details that Mike went over. But if you look down here in 2026, we're predicted to lose $2.035 million, and in 2027, $1.1 million. However, in 2028, we're predicted to receive $2.2 million. And this is one of the things that we really don't know if the calculation is correct, and that's why Mike said it might be something dealing with the way they're moving things around, and that's why we haven't received our assessed value yet. But once we see those final numbers, then that can, give us more detailed information. And hopefully we get that soon. That was due August 1st, so typically Marion County is never late, but this time I think it's just trying to finish, the final calculations. So the MLGQ, that has been kept at 4% for like the last 4%. 4 years. So in 2025, we have 4%. We're going to keep it in 2026 as well. The circuit breaker is estimated at 20% of the levy in 2025. Last year it was 17%, so there's a little increase there. And it probably will stay at 20% until probably 2028, but we'll see when the final numbers come through. This is just an estimate that Mike and I kind of came up with, and this is where we're going to calculate our property tax revenue that we may receive. And of course, there has been no growth in the levy freeze. That will change in 2028. In the past, we have really kind of advocated about the LET shares, certified shares compared to other other counties, connecting Marion County. However, we do know that that's going to be eliminated in 2028. So right now, we're not going to advocate for additional LET. We're just going to advocate for replacing the revenue that we are losing. Here are some 2026 challenges that we're going to have for our expenditures. Of course, we have increasing personnel costs because we have pay rate increase that we implemented this year in 2025, and we're going to give a raise in 2026. Then we also implemented the good wage initiatives, which that is great. So we just have to be able to sustain this, and we also address some compressions. And then, in 2026, we have 27 pay days. In addition to that, we also have Sunday premium hours that we have to take in consideration, and also thinking about opening additional branches on Sunday. We haven't made a final decision on that. That's just some of our assumptions right there. And then with the increase of pay rates, that also increased our workers' compensation liability insurance. That increased over 14%. So we have to keep that in mind every time we give raises. That our workers' compensation liability is going to increase. So we budget for this in the future. So we do know that's going to happen. Then recently, I'm not for sure if everyone heard about the Senate Enrolled Act number 409, where chapter 20 of it is where employees' absence to attend certain meetings for their child or children is paid for. And I think you get 1 day out of a year per child. So that's an increase of liability to the librarian. What did I do? Sorry about that. first line.
Mhm. There you go.
So I deleted some of the at the beginning, so I'll fix that later. So, this is the Senate and Road Act, so that's increased our liability. Then we also have security services, expenses have increased over time, and then the housekeeping, service, expense has increased. Then we, of course, we got to factor inflation as well, and then meeting the demands of the resources that have continued to increase, as far as in circulation. Then we also have the lack of flexibility due to high fixed, costs. And, that is what it is, and, it just happens like that. And then we have ongoing costs for technology and transfer towards software as a service. So, here you'll find a trend where we have the 2024 actual, so you compare it to our 2025 current adopted budget, and then a 2026 proposed budget. That's the error right there. That should be 2026 proposed budget. So, you'll see that the revenue has decreased over time. So, this current revenue year, we have 57 million. Next year, it'll be about 55.6 million, so there's a decrease. And then you'll see our expenses increase. Again, we'll cover the deficit by our, fund balance. But, in the meantime, what we do to ensure that we keep our expenses low, we review, contracts to see if we can renegotiate them. Look at, invoices as they come through to see if there's an error, to ensure that we're not overpaying for invoices. And then to continue to, negotiate any other, contractual services that comes up. So those are things that we try to do to keep, to stay, good stewards of our funds as they come in. So, I wouldn't predict that we have to cover 12 million, but we're gonna do our best to, keep that deficit a little lower than that, okay? Again, for the 2026, estimate revenue, it is 55.6 million. That is 81% of our budgeted revenue, with our 4% growth, and then our circuit record credits. Those credits have been established from 2024. There might be a little difference in 2026, where we predicted that that'll be 11.3 million, which decreases our property, revenue coming in. And then for intergovernmental, revenue, that's gonna stay, kind of flat, just, it has a little slight, decrease, but we may have an increase in COED, as Mike indicated, but it's not gonna be a great increase. Some of the other, receipts we have, like charges for services, that might have a slight, decrease, but we are predicting to have, more revenue coming in for events and everything because of the increase in the charges, and I believe that the schedule is booked out for 2026 already, we're getting close. And then our interest revenue, although we earn, a great interest in it, but, the interest will decline after that. So we're just factoring that into our, budget as well. But I predicted maybe, by the end of 2026, it might be a decrease of maybe 0.5 or 0.75% in the interest. And for the 2026 estimate expenses, again, that's about 67.2 million, and that includes the staff raises, possibly the increase in health insurance, but we're currently in negotiation right now with them, and I'm hoping that we can decrease that and maybe stay the current same rate that we have in 2025. Then, of course, the supplies, we have an increase, due to inflation there. And, kind of covered everything, like besides, we also have an increase in utilities, all of that I mentioned that before, so. In here, we have the 2026 budget, that's service fund. So you'll see in 2025, we're currently working on a bond for the West End renovation, which is gonna be about 15 million. And however, I don't have the payment in there, because I don't know that yet, but that will be included in the 16.9 million that we have to pay out for 2026 for the bonds. So although we do receive, we still have to make payments on that every year, twice a year. And this is a slide that Baker Tilly provided during their presentation at the board, the last two past boards, June and July, I believe it was. So this shows that our payment per year and how it declines every year, which is great because, you know, we're losing revenue in other places. So it'd be great that we don't have to pay so much out in debt, but although it's helping us out with the capital projects, but it's good to see a decline as the years go by. Again, this is the remaining budget for the 2026 budget that was advertised on the 1st and the 8th. Another $1 million for rainy day, that's been the same for the past 3 years. And then like we only have $125,000 in there, and that's the same as this year. It used to be $250, but because we don't typically use that much, I just kept it at $125,000. And Mike kind of talked about the long range plan, so I'll put this in here just so you can see that our ending cash balances for 2023 all the way up until 2028. You'll see like a decline, but these are just like structural deficit model. Things can change again because it incorporates unspent appropriations and expenses, that we have kept low, and then the revenue that we may not receive in the future. So this is just a little snapshot of that. I know I went through 27 slides real quick, but do anyone have any questions?
Any questions at all?
Pretty easy one, I think. In your visual about potential revenue, and you listed fees and services, is real rental part of that, or is that someplace else?
The fees and services,
Well, with what we're charging for real rentals, where is that?
in the revenue,
Yeah.
that is, let's see if I can.
Because it seems kind of small.
I'll show you on the pie chart, sorry.
Yeah.
So, that would be in other receipts. And as you can see, the other receipts or other revenue is like 3% of the pie.
Any other comments or questions?
Mike,
Please, Michael.
do you know when the contracts for the security and clean housekeeping expire?
I believe they expired in this year in December, is that correct, Adam? Yes.
Any other? Please. That's it.
I just have a comment. It's very advantageous to have the ability to transfer expense from capital projects to bond in terms of, renovations, all of that. That's a good position to be in. And I think that's something that we need to kind of emphasize to the public. Not many organizations, schools and other type of organizations would have that ability. And looking at the bond reduction schedule, also dictates what you can do and how you can keep that pattern going. So I think that's very impressive. I don't know many organizations that have that advantage. So that's just my comment, but it's a good thing to be able to do.
In addition to that, we're able to transfer expenses that are capital projects in our operating to the bonds, and that frees up operating funds if
Right.
we're become tight.
I
when
just-
we're paying expenses.
I just think that's such a big advantage, and it helps on your bottom line, on your expenses, especially your salaries and those other things that come up. That's something we need to emphasize, and that comes from a strong pattern of fiscal responsibility,
Yes.
and so that's good.
And that's why I want to tell the community and staff that we don't plan on, laying off people or anything like that. I think that's been a rumor, and I think because of our strong financial balance, that we're able to carry this on for at least a couple, 2 or 3 years to determine, what the 2028 and further will look like. I'm hoping that we will get replacement revenue, and so we're just waiting to see.
Well, we also need to thank you for managing our strong cash balance as well. That makes a big difference too. Thank you again to you both for all the work that you've done in putting in.
Thank you. And it's not just us, it was our predecessors as well, so, thank everyone that's been in this position, so.
Is there a motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Second. Very good. The motion has been moved and seconded. Any other further discussion? We'll now have a roll call to approve the closing of the public hearing. And also, we want to welcome our new colleague here. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Natisa Woodard. I am, as she stated, a new member of the board, so I am catching up on a lot of the information being shared. I look forward to working with you and serving the public. At this time, I probably have a lot of questions that I'll reserve for a private session, but I'm looking forward to serving. Thank you.
Welcome, Leticia.
Thank you.
And she says, help us with our roll call, please. Our usual roll call, Angie Gilbert is not here with us, so please just say your name and present.
Close here, voting to close.
We're closing the public hearing.
Approve of closing.
Eugene White, approve and close.
Thanks for having me.
Calvin Ricotta and
Pat Payne.
thank you.
As chair of the Finance Committee,
Just one more second. The public hearing is closed. The special meeting is reconvened.
before we reconvene our Finance Committee, we need a 2-minute break to kind of get our